What's going on, all of my healthcare brothers and sisters? I hope that you are having a wonderful day. The ATI-TEAS reading is a section of the test that is going to assess the test taker's ability to read, understand, and integrate knowledge from various sources. That's why it's so important to truly understand knowledge and ideas that's going to be on the ATI-TEAS test. In this video, we're going to be discussing what you need to know and how to pass your tests the first time. Let's get started. So to begin, we're going to look at the objectives that's going to be under knowledge and ideas. There's a total of 15 questions out of the overall 39 that's going to be on reading. You are going to need to know how to get evidence from the text to make predictions, inferences, as well as draw conclusions. You're going to need to compare and contrast the themes that are being expressed in that particular text. You're going to need to evaluate the argument. What is the overall argument that's being made? As well as evaluating and integrating data from multiple sources across various formats. So evidence is always key when we're looking at a particular text. We need to be able to cite the evidence that's happening within a text. So effective authors cite evidence and resources to support their ideas about that text. When you are taking the ATI-TEAS, you need to be on the lookout for how authors support his or her claim. Skim the passage to find what resources the author is using, and I do mean skim. These can be statistics, expert opinions, or examples within the text itself. After you have identified the evidence that is being used, ask yourself whether or not it's actually effective. An effective piece of evidence should be believable, relevant, as well as specific. If the author meets all three of these criteria, then it is likely that the author's claim is truly valid. If you're having trouble finding evidence to support a claim, try looking for keywords and phrases such as according to, for example, and in conclusion. These words and phrases can help you identify where the author is making a claim and what evidence he or she is using to support it. Let's take a look at a practice passage to help us identify specific evidence within that passage. So, according to a study by the National Education Association, students who receive homework help are more likely to succeed in school. The study found that homework help can actually improve a student's grades and increase their chances of graduating from high school. What evidence does the author use to support the claim that homework can help improve a student's grades? Okay. The author uses a study by the National Education Association to support the claim that homework help can improve a student's grade. This study found that homework can help the student's grade increase and their chances of graduating from high school also increase. In addition to finding evidence, you're also going to have to know how to make predictions from a text. In order to make predictions about what will happen next in a story, you will need to be able to understand the events that have already taken place. This means that you will need to be able to identify the main idea of the passage as well as the supporting details. I have already discussed this in my first ATI-TEAS reading video. If you haven't watched it, make sure that you go back and watch that video first so that you can identify these particular things. The main idea is typically what the passage is about, while the supporting details are the specific facts and examples that help explain that particular main idea. Once you have identified the main idea and supporting details of a passage, you'll be able to make predictions about what is going to happen next. To do this, you will need to have prior knowledge or experience to make inferences based on the information in the passage. So for example, let's say that you're reading a passage about a character who is lost in the woods. The character has been walking for hours and has not seen any signs of civilization. Based on this information, you can infer that the character will likely be tired and they're probably starting to get hungry, right? You can also predict that the character will continue to walk until he or she finds her way out of the woods. Now let's practice making predictions from a passage. We're going to read the following passage to answer the questions that follow. So the sun was setting and the sky was turning a deep red. John has been walking for hours and he was starting to feel tired. He had been following the river upstream, and it was getting harder and harder to see the path. What can you predict that John will do next? You can predict that John will continue to follow the river upstream until he finds a way out of the woods. He will likely be tired and hungry by the time that he finds his way out. He may also have to spend the night in the woods if he cannot find a way out before it gets dark. So we've made predictions. We've also found evidence. Now we need to draw conclusions from a text. In order to draw conclusions from a text, you need to be able to identify and understand the main idea and supporting details within the passage. This is really important that you need to know for the ATITs. You will also need to be able to make inferences based on the information within the passage. So a conclusion is a statement that you can make about something after you have analyzed all of the information that you have. In order to draw a conclusion, you will need to look at all of the evidence and decide what it means. So for example, let's use the same example from before with a character who is walking through the woods. The character has been walking for hours and has not seen any sign of civilization. Based on this information, you can conclude that the character is probably within a remote area. Now let's take a look at drawing a conclusion from a passage. We're going to read the same passage that we read before. The sun was setting and the sky was turning a deep red. John had been walking for hours and he was starting to feel tired. He had been following the river upstream, but it was getting harder and harder to see the path. The question is, what conclusion can you draw about John's location? You can conclude that John is most likely within a remote area. He has been walking for hours and has not seen any sign of civilization, which means he's likely too far away from any towns or any kind of farms or any kind of cities. So comparing and contrasting themes expressed in text is also an additional thing you will need to know. But you might be asking yourself, how do I identify what the theme of a text is? Well, the theme of a text is the centralized idea or message of the text that the author is trying to communicate to the reader. It's either going to be stated or it's going to be implied. So to identify the theme of a text, you'll need to look at the evidence in the text and determine what is it really trying to say to me. So for example, let's say you're reading a text about a character who is trying to decide whether or not they want to go to college. Sounds familiar, right? The character is considering the pros and cons of going to college. The evidence in the text supports the idea that the character is trying to make a decision about whether or not college is worth it. The theme of the text would be making decisions. The author is trying to communicate to the reader that making decisions is difficult, and sometimes you have to weigh the pros and cons of your options. So in order to identify a theme, you have to pay close attention to the story's elements, including narration, setting, characters, dialogue, and plot. So let's break each one of these down. Narration is the way the story is told. The narrator is the person that is trying to tell the story. The narrator can be a character in the story, or it can just be a third party altogether. Setting is the time and place that the story is happening. The setting can influence the events that take place in the story, thus enhancing the overall plot. Characters are the people or animals that are in the story. The development of the characters can reveal information about the theme within the story. Dialogue is the conversation between the characters. The dialogue can also provide additional information about the theme. And then lastly, plot. That is the sequence of events that are taking place within the story. So let's practice identifying themes in texts. We're going to read the following sentence again from our previous examples. The sun was setting and the sky was turning a deep red. John had been walking for hours and he was starting to feel tired. He had been following the river upstream, but it was getting harder and harder to see the path. The question may be, what is the theme of this passage? What do you think the overall theme is? Well, the theme of this passage is perseverance. John has been walking for hours and he is starting to now feel tired. He has been following the river upstream, even though it's getting harder and harder to see the path. Even though it is difficult, John continues to walk upstream. This shows that he is determined and that he is persevering in order to get out of that forest. So another common question I get all the time is, how can I find the similarities and differences within a theme? So now that we really truly know how to identify the theme, how are we going to compare and contrast two themes within two different texts? So we're going to answer the following questions based on the passages that we have here. So with passage A, it's the same one we've been using. The sun was setting, the sky was turning a deep red, John had been walking for hours, and he was starting to feel tired. He had been following the river upstream and was getting harder and harder to see the path. Passage B is Mary was walking home from school when she saw a kitten stuck in a tree. The kitten was meowing and it looked scared. Mary climbed the tree and rescued the kitten. So what was the overall theme from passage A? The theme from passage A was perseverance, right? We talked about that. John had been walking for hours. He was just now starting to get tired. He was following that river upstream, even though it was getting harder and harder to see the path. Even though it was difficult, John continued walking up that stream, which showed that he was determined to persevere through that particular area that he was in to get back to civilization. What is the theme of passage B? Well, the overall theme of passage B is compassion, right? Mary sees a kitten that's stuck in a tree and it is scared. And even though it's not her responsibility to get that kitten out of the tree, she decides to help anyways. This shows that she is a truly compassionate person. So you might get a question that says, how are the themes of passage A and B similar, right? Well, the themes of passage A and B are similar because they both deal with characters helping others. In passage A, John is helping himself by walking upstream, whereas in passage B, Mary is helping the kitten by rescuing it from the tree, right? And then you might also get a question that says, what about themes in passage A and B are different? Well, the themes in passage A or B are different in regards to the motives of that particular character, right? Each character has a different motive for why they're persevering, why they're compassionate, why they are helping. Well, John is walking upstream because he wants to get to the other side. He is helping himself, right? Mary is rescuing a kitten because it needs help. She's rescuing that kitten. So John is helping himself while Mary is helping someone else. So you may need to evaluate an argument. And to do that, you're going to have to be able to identify claims as well as counterclaims. So a claim is the main argument that the author is trying to make. The counterclaim is the argument that goes against that claim. So for example, let's say that the author's claim is that global warming is real and that it is caused by human activity. Well, the counterclaim to that might be that global warming is not real and it is not caused by human activity. There are 3 steps that you should take when you're evaluating an argument. Number 1 is you need to identify the author's main topic, right? What is being discussed here? Number 2, you want to ask yourself about the claim or opinion that is being expressed within that topic. And then lastly, number 3, you want to ensure that the author is also addressing counterclaims within their topic. If addressing counterclaims does not exist within the author's passage, then the text is overall weak and credibility is lost with the audience. You'll also need to know how to evaluate sources and evidence. When you're evaluating an argument, it's important to be able to identify what are your sources and what is your evidence. The source is a person, book, article, or website that the author is using to support their claim. The evidence is that specific information from that source that supports the claim. So for example, let's say that the author is using a book to support the claim. The source would be the actual book, and the evidence would be the specific quote or statistic that is found within that book. Examples of sources can include peer review, primary source, secondary source, as well as tertiary sources. So let's break each one of these down. Peer-reviewed is defined as published articles that have been evaluated as well as analyzed by experts on that specific topic. Primary sources is defined as the original document or first-hand account. So for example, a primary source might be a letter that was written by Abraham Lincoln. Secondary sources are defined as a document or account that interprets and analyzes an event, also known as a secondhand account of an event. So an example of a secondary source could be a biography by Abraham Lincoln. And then lastly, our tertiary source could be defined as a document or account that compiles, organizes, and summarizes a primary and secondary source. So usually the one that comes to mind always is an encyclopedia. An encyclopedia compiles information from both primary and secondary sources to make an article within it. When you're looking at sources, it's important to consider what the credibility is, accuracy is, objectivity is, and are there any biases? Let's take a closer look at analyzing rhetorical devices. So rhetorical devices are words or phrases that are used to persuade the audience. They're used to help the author make their particular point. There are 3 types of rhetorical devices that you can see. That is logos, ethos, and pathos. So let's break each one of these down. So logos is defined as an appeal to logic. It's a way of convincing the audience with facts and reasons. So logos, think logical. Logos, logical. An example of logos would be if the author said, according to a study of the CDC. This is an appeal to logic because they are using a credible source to back up their claim. Ethos is defined as an appeal to ethics. It is a way of convincing the audience with the author's credibility. So remember, think ethos, ethical, ethics, ethos. An example of ethos would be if the doctor said, I have been studying this topic for 20 years, right? They're trying to build credibility. They're trying to show the audience that this information is credible because I have been studying this for 20 years. And then lastly, pathos. Pathos is defined as an appeal to emotion. It is a way of convincing the audience of making them feel an emotional connection to the author and that particular topic. So an example of pathos would be if the author said, imagine how you would feel if you were the one affected by this. This is an appeal to emotion because he is trying to make the audience feel empathy. He's trying to make the audience, or he or she, is trying to make the audience feel empathetic by imagining what it would have been like had they been in that particular situation. That is logos, ethos, and pathos for rhetorical devices. So moving on to our last main objective under this particular category of knowledge and ideas is evaluating and integrating data from multiple sources across various formats. And we'll begin by selecting relevant data to analyze. So when you're looking at evaluating data, it's important to select what is relevant, right? This means that you want to choose the data that is related to your topic. So for example, if you're writing about the effects of global warming, you would want to select data that is effective to global warming, right? The melting of the polar ice caps, the changes in the temperatures over a period of time that is in relation to the melting of those ice caps. You'll also want to make sure that you select data from multiple sources. This will help you become more rounded in the topic and absolutely more credible to your audience. So if we're looking to become more credible, how do we know what to analyze in regards to data sources? So once you've selected relevant data, you're going to have to start analyzing it. This means that you will want to look at the data and to see what particularly is this data trying to say to me. You will want to look at the data and see if there are any patterns. So for example, if you're looking at data about the effects of global warming, you might notice that the effects are more pronounced in certain areas. You'll also want to take a look at data and see if there's any trends. So for example, again, if you're looking at those effects of global warming, you might notice the effects are getting worse over time. Those are your trends. 2 forms of data that you might want to evaluate is quantitative and qualitative data. So quantitative data is data that can be measured. So for example, the temperature of the Earth's atmosphere is quantitative data. Qualitative data is data that cannot be measured. So for example, the effects of global warming on the environment. You can't really measure it, but you know that it's happening. That is qualitative data. Now that we've collected all of our data and we've analyzed it, it is time for our final step, organizing data from various sources. This means that you're going to have to take all of that data and put it into a format that is easily understandable to the audience. So one way you can do this is to create a table or chart. This will help it become more visually appealing to the audience by being able to see specifically what's happening within that data. Another way to organize it could be to put it in chronological order. This helps that data become more linear in a way versus more graphical with your tables and your charts. And then lastly, you can organize data by its priority. Claims and evidence can be classified by either low priority, validity, or usefulness. So let's break these down. Low priority claims are those that are not essential for the argument. They can be cut without affecting the overall argument. Valid claims are those that are supported by evidence. There is evidence that supports the claim, making it valid. And then lastly, when it comes to useful claims, these are topics that help support the argument as well as are relevant to that specific topic. I hope that the information presented in this video is helpful in understanding knowledge and ideas when it comes to the ATI-TEAS reading portion of the exam. If you have any additional questions, make sure that you leave them down below. I love answering your questions. Head over to www.nursecheung.com where there are additional resources to help you pass your ATI-TEAS the first time. And as always, I will see you in our next video. Bye!